I recently received a review copy of Hashi from Coiled Spring, and it's a fun puzzle all about drawing bridges to connect islands before the other players, in order to score points. But each island can only have as many bridges as the number you've written on it. It's based on a popular Japanese puzzle, and it's challenging and offbeat, a refreshing title in a market saturated with very similar roll and write games. In this video, I'm going to delve deep into my collection of roll and write games to see what the core ingredients are of a really satisfying entry in the genre. The aim, as always, is to identify 10 key mechanisms which come up time and again. And if you fancy designing such a game, you're going to have your work cut out if you want to rise above the competition. So rather than repeating one of these mechanisms, why not subvert it, flip it on its head and create something genuinely new? I'm Adam Porter. I'm a game inventor from Cardiff in Wales, and over recent years I've made many videos covering different mechanisms in game genres: dice games, tableau building, and most recently flicking games. Well, today we're focusing on one of the most popular genres in the board game industry right now. Every game in the genre focuses around randomisers, usually a handful of dice or a deck of cards. Arguably, the roll and write genre was born when Polish toy maker Edwin Lowe brought Yahtzee to the American mass market in 1956. The origins of that game are pretty hazy. There seems to be slight variation in different countries: poker dice, Generala, and the game of Yacht. But Lowe had enormous success with his version, and the game's title has become synonymous with the core mechanism employed. Roll some dice, lock a selection, roll again 2 or 3 more times to generate your final selection. The Yahtzee mechanism. We could make a case for an earlier game as the precursor of all our modern roll and writes. Bingo dates back to 16th century Italy. A randomizer generates a number and people fill out their personal grid, with the first to complete a grid or section declaring bingo and winning the game. Coincidentally, it was Edwin Lowe who brought bingo to the US mass market in the 1930s. Lowe's company was purchased by Milton Bradley in 1973 for $26 million. Throughout the list, we'll see many different clever ways that game inventors have utilised cards and/or dice as randomisers. So St. Malo uses the traditional Yahtzee mechanism to generate buildings and materials which are drawn on the player's own player board. Rolling Realms has players simply roll 2 dice and allocate each one of them to a different score sheet. In Quicks, you roll 2 white dice and 4 coloured dice, and everybody may cross off the space corresponding to the sum of the 2 white dice onto their score sheet, but the player whose turn it is can also cross off a number equal to the sum of 1 of the white dice and 1 of the coloured dice. The catch is that it must be marked in the corresponding coloured column. Avenue is a flip and fill game. The randomiser is a single card draw. The chosen card dictates the shape which must be drawn onto players' maps. And similarly in Hashi, a single card is drawn, but here the players have a choice: write the number, or draw the indicated bridges, or do neither, or do both. And Welcome To uses the back of the cards to indicate a special action or scoring opportunity. There are always 3 decks in play and 1 card revealed from each, so this creates 3 combinations, a number and an action as displayed on the back of the top card of the deck. On any given turn, players can each select one of these combinations to place on their player sheet. So you've settled on your randomiser: roll and write or flip and fill. Or maybe you've discovered some ingenious new form of randomiser. Flick and write, anyone? So throughout this video I'll be using the term roll and write to describe all games in the genre, even those which use cards as randomisers. There's no collective term which encompasses all these randomise and record games, so this seems the easiest approach to use. Your next decision is whether the game is going to be turn-based or played simultaneously. In Einfach Tierisch, one player takes the 6 dice and rolls them 3 times. After the first throw, they set aside 3 dice. After the second throw, they set aside 2 dice. And the final die is rolled 1 last time. And this generates the player's final result, and they fill it in on their grid. Whichever player's animal is in the majority crosses off squares on their score sheet corresponding to the other animals showing on the dice. And if 2 policemen are showing, then the player scores nothing. Then the next player takes their turn. So the first player to cross off 2 complete columns wins the game. The problem with turn-based play like this is that the other players have nothing to do on your turn. They can't strategize because their options are going to be dependent on their own dice rolls, so they just have to sit passively and watch. St. Malo is a comparatively complex game in the genre, so waiting for your turn to come round could take a while. Many games get round this by having all players play simultaneously. In Welcome 2, all players select from the same 3 options, but they do so simultaneously, so no one's waiting around. And the benefit of this type of simultaneous play is that it often means the game becomes infinitely scalable. Essentially, any number of players can play the game, provided they have enough player sheets and everyone can see the randomizer. This is true in Welcome 2, in Avenue, in Hashi, in Cartographers, in Floor Plan, and Stonemeyer's Rolling Realms advertises it as a key feature. The next thing a designer needs to decide on is the goal of the game. In Yahtzee, of course, the goal of the game is to create sets of dice similar to those seen in poker, so 3 of a kind, a straight, a full house. And many roll and write games also require you to build sets. But an equally common goal is to record a sequence of numbers on your score sheet. So in Quicks, numbers must be crossed out from left to right in 4 different columns. You don't have to begin with the number furthest to the left, but if you skip any numbers, they can't be crossed out afterwards. Welcome 2 has a similar system. You can write a number anywhere on a row at any time, but the numerical sequence must be respected in each column so that the numbers increase from left to right and each number is used only once. Quinto uses the same system as Welcome 2, with the additional rule that you can't have the same number more than once in a column. And if you filled any columns at the end of the game, you'll score points equal to the numbers in the pentagon spaces. In Roman poker, on your turn you start by rolling 1 die. You may then roll an additional die, and repeat up to 5 times, so long as every roll can be organised to represent a valid Roman numeral. So XIV could count as a roll of 14, or it could be rearranged to XVI and counted as 16. The numbers must be entered from top to bottom, and they can only appear once. In Avenue, the game is played over 5 rounds, and in each round you must score more points than you did in the previous round. Otherwise, your score for the round is 0. Ganz schön clever brings together a whole range of number sets and sequences into a single score sheet. The result on the yellow die is crossed off in a 4x4 grid, with players aiming to complete rows and columns. The blue die works similarly, except you must add the result of the white die before you enter a number. To cross off a square in the green section, the die must meet the minimum value indicated on the space, and these increase from left to right. And in the orange area, you must place numbers from left to right, and some squares have multipliers which will increase your score. In the purple area, the numbers must increase in value from left to right, with the exception that any number may follow a 6. Aside from sets and sequences, the other major mode of play in roll and writes is spatial planning. So Avenue is a route building game. At the start of each round, a farm is identified which players are going to be trying to supply. Each turn, a card is revealed which indicates the pattern each player must draw onto their sheet. And when 4 yellow cards have been revealed, the routes are scored. Players score points for each grape connected to their chosen farm. Additionally, at the end of the game, players will score points for each purple grape connected to the purple castle and each green grape connected to the green castle. Hashi is another example of a route building game. Each connection between islands can only have 1 or 2 bridges, and to finish an island it must have the same number of bridges as the number written on the island. Bridges must never cross each other, so players need to take care to avoid cutting themselves off from certain islands throughout the game. Many recent games in the genre have utilised polyominoes. Popularised by tile-laying games like Patchwork and Baron Park, polyomino games see players filling a grid with Tetris-style pieces to fulfil certain objectives. In a roll and write, or more commonly a flip and fill game, players draw polyomino shapes onto a grid on their own player sheet. Silver and Gold is a simple example, so a card is revealed, and all players cross off boxes in a small grid on one of their playing cards to match the indicated shape. Cartographers has a similar card reveal, but often there's a choice of 2 different shapes, and the colour matters too. Players simultaneously fill up their grid with different terrains, trying to surround mountains and monsters while fulfilling the various objectives chosen for the game. St. Malo is another game with an open grid which players fill with different icons, and here the shape isn't determined by the randomizer, but players do need to think about the spatial arrangement of their icons, because scoring is frequently dependent on one icon being placed adjacent to another. Players are building a city, and after a series of rolls and re-rolls, they select one icon from their available results to score. They can pay coins to rotate additional dice to their chosen icon, and any goods crates added in a single turn must be placed adjacent to each other. Later in the game, you might add a merchant to your city, and they'll gain coins for each adjacent crate. Walls are placed on the outer edge of your city, and when the corner towers are connected, you gain a bonus. When you add an architect to your city, you can immediately spend lumber, which you've gathered earlier in the game, to build houses, and these must be placed adjacent to the architect in an uninterrupted group. Adding a juggler to your city will score points for each adjacent citizen of any kind. In Welcome To, one of the abilities you can sometimes select is the temp agency. If you choose a number combined with this icon, you can add or subtract 1 or 2 from the number before entering it onto your sheet. And when you do this, you also mark off a box in the temp agency section. The player who marked off the most boxes at the end of the game scores points. This sort of majority scoring is a staple of set collection games, yet I haven't come across it too much in roll and write games. I'm sure there must be many of them out there, but I was surprised not to see it come up in the many games on my shelves. Another common goal in these games is a race to fulfill an objective. In Hashi, the first player to fill in all the red islands scores 9 points, and every player who does so later in the game scores only 5. Similarly, for the blue islands, the first player gets a bonus, and again for the first player to finish 6 connected islands. In Welcome To, there's always a race to achieve 3 different objectives, with the first player to achieve the goal scoring higher. But in this game, the goals are randomly chosen from a deck at the start of the game. For example, the first player to build 5 extensions on their houses, or the first player to build all houses in a specified street, or the first to build all the parks, or all the pools in 2 streets. Of course, many games don't feature just one type of goal, but a variety. And Welcome To features this sort of variety, a modular system where you create a unique game experience each session based on the many possible combinations of goal cards in the game. Floor Plan similarly features variable goals in each game. So create a hot tub by putting 12 deck squares around 4 water squares, or create a walk-in closet by connecting a bedroom to a closet of 5 spaces or more. Cartographers uses 4 different scoring criteria in each game, selected from a pretty big deck of options. In this game, the scoring is staged, so that at the end of spring you score objectives A and B, in summer you score B and C, in autumn it's C and D, and in winter it's D and A. And changing up the scoring in each session keeps the game feeling fresh, and modular systems like those seen in Welcome To, Floor Plan and Cartographers create an enormous number of possible experiences. But we can increase those permutations even more by providing a variable interface. Welcome To has seen a wide range of different player sheets released for the game in mini expansion packs. I have the Christmas, Halloween and Doomsday packs, so in any given game I might be scoring points for hanging Christmas lights, or scoring bonuses for candies and ghosts, or for building bunkers. With the Cartographer's expansion maps, a volcano might continually erupt, spreading lava and destroying my map. Or I might be building an underground and overground civilization, but always connected to the gate. Or I might be working on individual small islands, paying a fee to advance from one island to the next. In Silver and Gold, players fill in small grids on individual dry wipe playing cards. When one is completed, it's added to a score pile and a new card is started, so the interface you're working with continuously changes throughout the game. Rolling Realms also uses dry wipe playing cards for that player interface. Each card has unique rules and scores in a unique way, based on previous Stonemaier Games titles from their catalogue. In this way, the game combines the variable goals we discussed earlier with a variable interface. Expansion modules are being released to increase the number of possible permutations relating to other popular games in the hobby. In Rolling Realms, filling out certain sections of a grid will generate you resources, which are marked off on a separate card. And you can spend these resources later in the game to access various special abilities, generally focused on mitigating any unlucky dice rolls. So spend 2 pumpkins to adjust a dice result by +1 or -1. Spend 2 hearts or 2 coins to gain an additional die. Marking off certain spaces to generate special actions is a common feature of the genre. In Silver and Gold, if you mark a square with a cross in it, you immediately fill in another square. If you mark a square with a coin, you collect the coin. If you fill in a palm tree space, you score a number of points equal to the number of palm trees showing in the central display, +1. In Ganshon Clever, as soon as you complete a row or column with an X bonus, you immediately mark a box in the corresponding coloured area. The coloured bonus indicates that a player can immediately place that indicated number in the next available space of that particular area. You can also generate two different types of actions which are circled on your player sheet, and actions can be crossed off to manipulate dice results, re-rolling dice, or selecting an extra die on your turn. In Floor Plan, additional actions are awarded along with victory points whenever a player completes an objective. These actions might allow you to treat a future dice result as any number you wish, or to double the effects of the selected dice in a future round. The effect of the bonuses in Floor Plan provides a double reward for completing objectives. Players get points, but they also get a bonus ability. Now this is something usually to avoid when designing games, because it can create a bit of a snowball effect. The player who's winning on points is also gaining special powers, which is likely to pull them further ahead of their opponents. Many roll and writes award penalty points to players if they find themselves unable to enter a certain dice result or card draw onto their player sheet. In Quicks, you might find that you can't place a certain number on your sheet while still obeying the required numerical sequence. In that case, you put a cross in the penalty box, which will be worth -5 points at game end. And the same rule exists in Quinto. In both games, marking 4 penalty boxes is one of the possible triggers which brings about the end of the game. Welcome To uses the same mechanism. 3 failed placements triggers the game end, and players lose an increasing number of points for each penalty space they've crossed off. In Dice Stars, a player who finds himself unable to write a legitimate entry on their player sheet will take a penalty. And in this case, the first player to take a penalty triggers the game end. Harvest Dice takes a different approach. Players who are unable to place their vegetables over multiple turns are given a bonus rather than a penalty. These bonuses function as a catch-up mechanism. If you're unable to place a vegetable on your grid because you're unable to find a spot adjacent to other matching vegetables, you must feed it to your pig. But you can choose to do this even if a placement was actually possible. And when you fed your pig a complete row of vegetables, you gain the ability to manipulate future dice, improving your chances of getting just the result you need. Roll and write games are not known for high levels of interaction between players. Rolling Realms, Avenue and Floor Plan are examples of games with no interaction at all between players. They are true multiplayer solitaire games. You simply compare your scores at the end of the game. Hashi and Welcome To contain minimal player interaction. You're racing to score certain objectives before your opponents, but there's nothing that you can do to hinder your opponent. But many of the other roll and writes have experimented with minor mechanisms to keep players engaged with what the other players are doing. In Quicks, if a player has filled out at least 5 spaces in a row, they can cross off the furthest right space of the row, locking it for all players. And that coloured dice is then removed from the game. Nobody can enter any more numbers in that row. In Einfach Tierisch, you're attempting to roll and re-roll the dice so that you end up with a majority of your own animal type, since the majority animal gets to cross off spaces on their grid. But it's quite possible that there might be a tie, in which case another player might share the benefit, or worse, an opponent's animal might be in the majority, in which case they cross off boxes and you get nothing. In St. Malo, when players roll swords, they're marked off on the central board. When a complete row of swords is filled in, all players must defend against a pirate attack. They compare the attack value of the pirates, which increases through the game, with their own defence value based on the number of soldiers in their city and completed city walls. If their defence isn't high enough, then the city loses a cannon, which means you'll be getting a penalty of -5 points at game end. Cartographers has a really nice little interactive element in an otherwise fairly solitary game. When a monster card is drawn, the players pass their sheet to the player sitting next to them. Their opponent draws the monster on their sheet, usually in the most inconvenient spot, and then the sheets are returned to their owner. If the monster isn't surrounded by the end of the round, it's going to score negative points. Most roll and write games have players working on their own individual player board, but in the two-player game Quo Vadis, players share a grid which is different in each game. On your turn, you roll and re-roll dice Yahtzee style, and then you fill in a single space on the grid depending on your dice results. One player is attempting to connect all 3 crosses on the grid with a continuous chain of crosses. The other player is attempting to connect all 3 circles. Some roll and writes feature passive interaction. In Quicks, on any player's turn, all players mark off a box corresponding to the 2 white dice rolled, but the active player crosses off an additional space using one of the coloured dice. In Ganz Schön Clever, on your turn you roll 6 dice. You choose one and you enter that value. All dice which show a lower value are set aside in the box. You can then roll any remaining dice once again, selecting one and entering that value on your sheet, once again setting aside any lower valued dice. You do this one final time, and then all remaining dice are placed into the box. All other passive players then get to select one dice result each from the box and enter it onto their own sheet. One other interactive mechanism used in roll and writes is dice drafting. In Harvest Dice, a handful of dice are rolled with each colour representing a different vegetable. On your turn, you select one die from the pool and draw the vegetable in the matching numbered column. Then each other player does the same in turn until there's just one die remaining in that pool. The colour of the final die is crossed off in the mark it section, increasing the points awarded for collecting that type of vegetable. So throughout the game, the players have a degree of control over what the scoring conditions are for the game. In Dice Stars, on your turn you pull 1 to 3 dice from a bag and roll them, adding them to a central pool of dice. You then select a colour, a number or the star and take all dice matching that characteristic. You mark off spaces on your grid according to the number of dice taken in the matching column or row, entering the combined total from the dice in the final space. At the end of the game, these values are going to be worth points. If you take stars, you fill out bonus spaces to the right of the rows, but take care because a completed row of bonus stars is going to double your score for that row, but an incomplete row of stars will cancel out any values in the row. So it's better to have no stars in a row than an incomplete row of stars. So the interaction in Dice Stars comes from leaving dice behind in that pool after you've drafted your own selection of dice. Roll and write games have become a major genre in the hobby. Many successful games now receive the roll and write treatment, with a smaller spin-off game to accompany the big box experience. Roll and writes are generally portable, they're cheap to produce, and the format is very adaptable, so there's a huge design space to explore. In this video, and in my gaming experience in general, I've barely scratched the surface of what's available or what's possible in the roll and write genre. But hopefully I've given you some ideas about what the genre is all about and the sort of mechanisms you might want to employ if you're wanting to design such a game. As always, use the comments to let me know your favourite titles in the genre and any glaring omissions in my list of frequently used mechanisms. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time. All the best.